99% of my artworks have one thing in common. No matter what characters I've drawn, what pose I've chosen, and what lighting I have set up, there's always one part that looks exactly the same. Most of my characters end up exiled in a white void, and for the longest time, I told myself I was fine with that. Since the character was the main focus, backgrounds were optional to me. But honestly, I was just scared. The one time I actually tried drawing a background, it came out like this. The colors were flat, my characters looked completely out of place, and don't even get me started on this waffle recipe over here. This thing looks like a piece of cardboard sitting on top of a flat counter with zero depth. This attempt was so bad that one of my viewers still hasn't let me live this down to this day. In the back of my mind, I knew every drawing I've done was unfinished. Leaving them in a white void was a safer option, and I reassured myself that an empty background is better than a flat background that ruins everything I spent hours drawing. But I'm tired of my incomplete artworks. I spent over a year refining my character art to something I'm actually proud of, and every single one of them is sitting in a white void. It's time I finally face my biggest art fear, backgrounds. Since I have basically no experience in drawing backgrounds, I didn't know exactly how to get started. So the first thing I thought of that involves a background is a building. So I searched for a reference and started drawing a background for the first time. 30 minutes later, my so-called building was finished. The structure is there if you ignore how stretched out it looks, or how poorly my rendering was. But the part that truly surprised me was the stairs. Like, comparing my character art to this building, you would think two completely different artists drew them. Back then, I knew something was missing, but I had no idea what went wrong exactly. Instead of jumping straight into another building, I went back to the one thing that always gives me confidence when I was down, drawing boxes. This time, I drew them in perspective, to kinda get a feel for how it actually works. And once the shapes started making sense, I decided to challenge myself to drawing another object commonly seen outside, the trees. While drawing this background, I quickly discovered a habit of mine. You see, I'm the type of person that likes to detail everything. Naturally, I started to attempt capturing every detail for the leaves, and just as quickly, my wrists got tired. But backgrounds don't work like that. Not everything needs to be detailed, especially objects that are far away. So I did a quick experiment and discovered something interesting. On the left side, I drew trees with line work, and on the right side, I painted loose shapes. And to my surprise, the right side reads way better, even though it was less detailed. For the next couple of backgrounds, my goal was to get familiar with a really helpful digital tool called the perspective ruler. This tool helps me draw scenes by automatically snapping my lines to specific vanishing points, which makes my workflow way quicker. I drew a couple of indoor scenes with this tool and started to think, maybe backgrounds were easier than I thought. However, there was just one problem. No matter how many backgrounds I've drawn, I was still really bad at rendering them. Clearly, I still have a lot to learn, especially how objects interact in 3D space, which brings up the next big hurdle. Perspective is something I actively avoid in my art, but in order to draw backgrounds, I know I can't hide behind my white voids any longer. So I started spending a lot of time drawing rooftops to get a sense of how two-point perspective works in a simple scene. One exercise that really helped things click is grouping buildings and color coding them. Once I deconstruct these buildings, I realized something game-changing. You see, the objects that lie below the horizon line, you are able to see the roof of these buildings. But when the building lies above the horizon line, you can no longer see the roof. It's kinda like picturing yourself looking up or looking down, and this helped me understand how buildings work in perspective. Take a study for example. Since the horizon line sits below every building, we are looking up at a subject, so the roof is completely hidden from our view. With this knowledge, I was able to understand how an object works in relation to the horizon line, which helped me apply it to these buildings in three-point perspective. Everything was going great, and I felt like I was beginning to make a lot of progress, until I eventually realized I've been subconsciously making a huge mistake. Every building I've drawn so far is flat. There's no real colors or rendering, and since backgrounds are not meant to stay flat forever, it was finally time to learn how to give my backgrounds life. Before I could get into rendering, there was still one thing holding me back. I had no idea how to actually approach this. Characters and backgrounds are completely different in terms of rendering. With a character, I know exactly where to start. However, staring at a background, I just had a bunch of flat shapes staring right back. Thankfully, this is where Skillshare comes in, who are kind enough to sponsor this video. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of creative classes taught by real people, with classes that are designed for the joy of learning something new. It is the best place to learn a creative skill or sharpen the skills you use every day that may help reignite a passion you've been putting off. By taking this environmental art concept painting class, I was able to follow the detail class that guided me through and brought my backgrounds to life. One specific thing I learned in the class was utilizing the lasso tool. By selecting a specific area with the lasso tool, I could isolate sections of my backgrounds and rendering them in groups without accidentally painting over everything else. Combining this with a gradient tool, I could efficiently block in lights to shadow transitions without having to manually paint every single value. This sped up my workflow, and I would definitely be using this technique going forward. And with Skillshare's help, I was able to complete list drawing. If you are interested and want to give this a try yourself, make sure to take advantage of my unique link in the description, the pinned comment, or scan a QR code on the screen. Because the first 500 people that use my link will get a month of Skillshare for free. Get started today! So after painting this background, I had an idea. Instead of just copying a single reference, what if I took the background and drew it in different time settings? Since the sunset scene had a direct reference, I assumed that one would come out the best. But instead, something interesting happened. All of these 3 backgrounds, the nighttime came out the best for me personally. I can't fully explain why, maybe because I wasn't trying to copy everything. However, one thing I did struggle with is the sun and moon placement. I realized I can't follow the sunset reference because the earth is spinning. So honestly, I'm just guessing my sun and moon placement. Anyways, after finishing these 3 backgrounds, I started to look back on every background I'd drawn over the past month and a half, and something hit me. Backgrounds are a lot of work. Some of them may take just as long as the character art itself, but somehow they feel like something you normally don't appreciate or take for granted. In character art, the characters takes a spotlight, so background just set the scene and take a backseat. So why do artists even bother drawing one? Because without one, the illustration feels like something is missing, and I'm now starting to appreciate backgrounds more, because I believe they truly are the missing pieces to my art. Before I started drawing my final piece, I wanted to first fix my accursed waffle recipe background. Looking at it again after spending 2 months studying backgrounds, I had mixed emotions on this piece. I was embarrassed that I actually thought this was decent. However, now I also feel confident, because this time I knew what went wrong. So the very first thing I noticed was how my perspective ruler was placed. I mean, look at this horizon line. To fix this, I set up a new perspective grid and got to work. The very first thing composition-wise I thought of was to bring up the blinds and let some sunshine in. As for our waffle recipe book, since it sits below the horizon line, we can see a little bit of the top. And adding this subtle detail gives the book an actual 3D shape, and it's no longer that flat cardboard that will haunt my dreams. I also added kitchen appliances to fill the wall that was completely flat, sad, and empty from before. Finally, for the rendering, it was easy to apply lighting because we have the sun shining from the outside through our kitchen window. One thing I want to mention is, I didn't fix the lighting for the character, because I only wanted to focus on the background so we get an easier comparison. And looking at both versions side by side, it felt like a heavy weight had just been lifted off my shoulders. Bringing up the blinds wasn't just a random choice I made. I wanted the scene to feel like a start of a brand new day, and in my point of view, it's like I finally closed the chapter on the drawing that scared me into avoiding backgrounds for over a year. And after lifting that burden, it's finally time to put it all together for the final artwork in this video. In the past, I probably would have just jumped right onto Pinterest and started browsing for ideas. Before I get ahead of myself, I need to learn one of the most important fundamentals of art: composition. I first started by mapping out my ideas using a technique I've learned called thumbnail sketching. Since my vision was clear from the start, I wanted to draw a character somewhere high up with a cityscape behind them. At this point, I didn't have to commit to anything just yet, so I just threw a bunch of random drawings onto an empty canvas, and eventually ended up with these 3 thumbnail sketches. The first one, I kinda went overboard on the buildings. As a character artist first, I want the characters in my art to shine, and this just feels too much like an environmental scene. So for my next sketch, I made sure to make the character the centerpiece. But it was a problem. It felt too ambitious, and I didn't know if I could pull it off yet. Finally, I instantly resonated with my 3rd thumbnail. A character hanging off a ledge, with a bunch of buildings behind. And once I made my decision, I finally felt ready to take the next step. Starting with a sketch, I drew my city backgrounds first. But it was a problem. You see, without proper scaling, the background can easily overpower my character. Recognizing my mistake, I decided to sketch out a placeholder character, so I can get a sense of scale to set the scene. For my buildings, I used the Google Map 3D tilt feature to view the buildings and get a feel for how they actually sit in perspective, as well as using a game to check out the city environment. Moving on to my character sketch, I will be drawing Nanoli as a tribute to where I got my city references from. Everything was going well until halfway through, I decided to change the right arm. When I zoomed out of the scene, the right arm felt really stiff and out of place. I was honestly hesitant to change my pose halfway through my sketch because I didn't want to make the hand a focal point. Thankfully, I found this really nice hand reference and eventually ended up with a sketch. While doing my line art, I started regretting my decision to draw Nanoli because her character design involves a lot of clothing details, so my line art took way longer than usual. And after 6 long hours, I finally finished my line art. Next, I started mapping out lighting with grayscale. Since I'm drawing this complex scene, this step was really important for me to figure out where I want my lighting without committing to colors just yet. And this process definitely sped up my rendering down a line. While rendering my character, there were a few decisions I had to keep in mind. Do I want my scene to be daytime or nighttime? I'm also rendering my character pretty bright, so if I want a nighttime scene, how will I be able to make sure my lighting is consistent? I ended up choosing a nighttime scene and started the excruciating process of rendering buildings. After an hour of just trial and error, of me mostly failing to draw windows, I decided to make my own windows and just copy and pasted them, which freed me from this torture. Anyways, this entire process took a while, but the creative freedom really introduces a new perspective of art that I was able to experience for the first time. Putting everything together, my art came out like this. Let me just show you something real quick. If I remove the background and leave only the character, the pose just feels wrong. One of her legs is just gone. Without context, this feels incomplete. When I first started learning how to draw, I genuinely thought backgrounds were optional. I thought it's something you add if you have time. So backgrounds are not something high on my priority list of things to learn. But looking at this final piece, I was wrong. Even as a character artist, I realized the background is just as important as the character. This entire piece took me 28 hours, my longest single piece by far. And for the first time, I can look at something I drew and say, it's actually finished.